look at it.
Thank you very much. It was very good. Alan?
Hello, I'm Alan. My comment, I think, is in line with what you've said, Conrad, about we're erring by focusing on discussing these pejorative terms over and over and over again rather than addressing real problems. An example of that, I think, is the discussion of gentrification. Okay, gentrification is a pejorative term, but let's really talk about what it is. It's people, mostly white people, coming in, investing their money to improve the housing stock, to improve businesses, to improve neighborhoods, to build parks, to do a lot of good things. Okay? Yes, they're mostly white. That's the problem. It's not that these things are being done, it's that these rising housing values are going to white people, not black people. It's rising rents going to white landlords and not black landlords, okay? The problem is, who's got the money? And how do we get more money, more economic advantage to black people? The problem is not improving rundown neighborhoods, okay? Black people do not like to live in rundown neighborhoods any more than white people do. And those that only focus on gentrification are expressing a kind of racism, I think, because they're saying, hey, leave those rundown neighborhoods alone, let the black people live in the rundown neighborhoods, and let's not do anything about it.
Okay, we'll take you, and then two more here, okay? And then David, so 4 more. And then we'll bring it to a close.
So my name is Star Austin. I'm a former religious education director at several UU churches throughout the country, and I'm Linda's partner, for those of you who don't know. And I just wanted to mention that when the Unitarian Universalist Association started talking about white supremacy, a few points. One is that language came from people of color, from colleagues of color, who wanted white people in the Unitarian Universalist churches to start talking about our supremacy problem as a cultural problem, not as specific actions, but as, and while I appreciate what Conrad's saying, that when you start talking about it as the air we breathe and the water we swim in, we can lose some nuance. But my colleagues of color specifically wanted us to start acknowledging that we're breathing different air and we're swimming in different water, even within Unitarian Universalism, when we apply for jobs, when we apply for promotions, the way we're critiqued about how we dress in our congregations, when we present in front of our congregants, the way we're critiqued about our speech patterns, our grammar, it's different for my colleagues of color who are serving predominantly white congregations, because Unitarian Universalism is predominantly a white denomination. And please note that I said predominantly, because sometimes my fellow white people like to say we are white, and we are not. There are people of color in our pews, and they matter. You matter to us. And the other thing I wanted to say is that when that call came out from colleagues of color that wanted us to do a teach-in for white supremacy, there were 13 religious educators and ministers asked to be a part of that. Linda Hill, your director of religious education, was one of those members, as was I, on that call. So there are 2 people here who participated in the teach-in for white supremacy who created the materials. One of the things that I like to lift up when I talk about white supremacy, because we do think of neo-Nazism, we do think of slavery, and nobody wants to be that. Like, nobody wants to go, I'm a white supremacist, because you'll think I'm a Nazi. But the fact remains that I live in a culture that when I go down to Walmart or to Albertsons and I want to buy a hair care product, I'm going to have my pick of the aisle. And it's going to be on the top shelf at eye level, and it's going to have lots of models on those boxes that look like me. And I can spend anywhere from $1.50 to $20.50 to get the shampoo that's going to work for my hair type. My friend India, who is African American, can't do that. She's going to have 3 selections at the bottom where she has to sit down in the floor as though she were a child or an animal and root around in the dusty boxes to find what's going to work for her hair type. And that's actually a really mild example of white supremacy, that culturally we put products that are going to appeal to white people in our stores. And sometimes we do that and we say, well, nobody in this neighborhood who shops here needs this product. We'll just carry one or two. Well, maybe they're not shopping there because the products that are available aren't readily seen by them when they walk into the store. So I wanted to lift that up because when we talk about white supremacy and we talk about white privilege, it can feel really uncomfortable. I grew up very poor. It was hard for me to wrap my mind around having privilege. You know, I was like, oh, my family fought really hard, and we were on food stamps, and we did this, and we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. That's a whole nother conversation. But there's different kinds of privilege, and that's one example of just walking in and being able to buy something.
Thanks very much. Appreciate your comments.
I could say a lot, but I'm going to keep it kind of short. So I'm a biracial person, and that's important from where I come from because my experiences are different. My experiences are different from someone who is maybe more obviously African American than I am, and someone who is obviously white. And I think there's a lot I could say, and I appreciate all the comments that were made here. My idea of people who are more obviously white is what the lady said in the back, those everyday things where I have to really think about, could I live in this place? Can I travel to this place? There's certain places I will not go where my sister-in-law, who's a white woman, and her husband go and travel around the south of the U.S. all the time. And I don't know that I could go there because I've been to some of those places and I'm not welcome. So I think that's that everyday stuff that sometimes happen. The other thing I kind of want to just sort of point out is, as I sort of started to say, our experiences as people of color are all different. And sometimes what happens is that sometimes people in a majority population assume that we've all had the same experiences, and we have not. I grew up very middle class, what you would consider more of, my father was black, my mother was white, but we grew up very middle class, and we had things that other people didn't have. But that didn't mean we could go live in places that we could easily afford, or my father could get a job as something he really wanted to do, because he couldn't, because he was a black person. So we're not all poor. We didn't all grow up poor. And we all have very different experiences. And I just want to point out that we're still individuals. And that's what kind of bothers me when I'm treated as someone who is in this big group. But I'm an individual, and I would like to prefer to be treated that way.
Thank you. Thank you, Lisa.
I knew somebody when I was working at Sears, a young black woman who, if she was invited to a wedding or some sort of social event, and it was in a neighborhood she'd never been to before, she would have to make the effort to drive there during the day and back and figure out what the safe route was for her to drive to the place and back. And most of us take for granted that we don't have to do that. And I understand why some people call it privilege, because we don't have to do that. I don't have to do that. I don't have to worry to that extent when I do something like that. I would rather we focus on the people that can't do that and say, what can we do to make it a right, rather than have it be looked at as a privilege. You know, gay men that I knew who would go on vacation and come back and have to go through all their vacation photos and take out the ones that showed them with their partner before they would show their photos at work, things like that. The extra effort that we generally don't think about when we're part of whatever considered to be the majority class is.
I want to comment on the concept that real racial injustice is only those actions that are blatant or institutional that can be prevented by some program. It's not the case. even small things, small everyday things, as Lisa was mentioning, that I consider microaggressions can be very, very damaging. And I was, for lack of a better word, a perpetrator of these microaggressions when I was a religious educator in Louisiana. Not even aware I was doing these things, but I was doing some really hurtful things. And I was reminded of one instance that happened in your story, Hannah, about having friends that can tell you when you're doing something that you should, or saying something that isn't cool. I was having in conversation with a parent, a black woman, and she was trying to get across some issue, something that I was doing. She was telling me I was doing something, and I couldn't, I couldn't understand it. And so she was getting angry, really angry at me, and I started crying. And so I realized from her reaction, but later in just thinking about things and studying things, that my act of crying, which to me I was doing because I realized how much I was hurting her, and I didn't want to do it, was a microaggression, because that meant that she had to take care of me in my tears instead of being able to share her pain and her anger about what I was doing.
Yeah.
And that was really hurtful to her.
David? And we'll end with this because it's...
I just wanted to add to the thinking about what I call labels. And I do worry about our tendency to use labels as though they communicate something. And I don't think they necessarily do. Whatever the label is, whether it's a label to describe a group, to describe an action, the label is not the thing. The label is not the person. So if we blithely go around spouting labels, whether it be white supremacy or black supremacy or whatever the label is not the thing, and it doesn't necessarily communicate. A few years ago, I tried an experiment with myself, which I continue, and I suggest it might be useful for others to try. And that is not to use labels for a month. In your speech, in your thinking, and see what happens. For me, it forced me to detail and describe what I intended. And that was very different. In some cases, I realized I didn't even clearly understand what the label meant. So I invite us to try that. Live without labels for as long as you can and see what happens.
I want to thank you all for this, I think, very active interchange of ideas around this whole complexity of terms, issues, historical fact, etc. We probably should have more interactive services in the future. I'm going to take advantage of having the microphone here very briefly to make an announcement. The board has approved an adult education committee, and that adult education, I'll chair it for the first year, that adult education committee, which includes, but is not limited to, adult RE. In other words, the course presentation, whatever it is, may not have a strictly religious content. I'm inviting you, and I'll follow this up with an article in the, not the next newsletter, but the newsletter after that, to invite people to submit ideas that they would, a class that they would like to teach, or a class that they would like to have taught, or a presentation, musical and otherwise, that they would like MVU to sponsor, with the intent of inviting in the Northwest community. This is an attempt to broaden our appeal, broaden our presence in the Northwest. Even as we look for a new home, we can bring that off right here. We have adequate facilities to do so. So look for those announcements. This Adult Education Committee will take care of the logistics, et cetera, but we need ideas now. And think broadly. Think Northwest Tucson as you send those in to me. Thank you.
I'm going to invite everyone to join us for coffee and continuing conversation in the hall across the way after service. We don't usually do that, but clearly people are thinking about this service and have lots more to say, so let's continue it there. As we go into the offering, I think also we won't do the final hymn because we're running short of time. The offering is considered to be a sacrament of the free church. By that, we mean it's a blessing to be able to support our religious community ourselves, to make possible by our own generosity everything we dream of